So, um, if I told you that the Strait of Hormuz, the absolute most critical maritime choke point on the planet.
Yeah, where like roughly 20% of the world's oil flows every single day.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
If I told you that exact spot was facing this sudden, massive geopolitical disruption, economic history tells us exactly what happens next.
Oh, yeah. The old textbook says oil prices should just be skyrocketing.
Exactly. Global markets should be panicking, and you, the listener, should be bracing for a massive hit at the gas pump.
Totally.
But recently, this highly publicized temporary toll-free agreement was struck between Donald Trump and Iran regarding this exact waterway and the market response.
Crickets. I mean, it barely blinked.
Right. In fact, in the lead up to this, global oil prices actually dropped. So today we are doing a deep dive into why the old rules of economic physics are suddenly, well, failing.
Yeah, and what that actually means for your wallet, your business, and I mean, honestly, the whole geopolitical future of Europe.
Because it is a profound shift.
It really is. It completely defies the conventional wisdom we've operated under for, what, the last 50 years?
At least.
We are stepping out of these theoretical models and into a reality where the structural plumbing of the global economy has fundamentally changed, and most people haven't even realized it yet.
Which is the exact mission of our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We're exploring this incredibly dense, highly revealing mid-year economic review produced by ING.
It's a fascinating document.
It really is. It features their chief economist, Marieke Blom, having this deep conversation with financial journalist Martin Visser. And what makes this specific analysis so compelling is that amidst this sea of doom and gloom economic forecasting everywhere else.
Is all you see on the news.
Right. But Bloom and Visser lay out this surprisingly glass half full perspective.
Yeah, they really pull back the curtain on these unseen shock absorbers that are basically keeping the European economy, and specifically the Netherlands, totally afloat.
So we are going to explore everything from this phantom oil shock we just mentioned to the psychological trauma of grocery store inflation, all the way to the brutal, unforgiving math of how a country actually goes about funding a sudden 20 billion euro defense bill.
And that oil anomaly in the Strait of Hormuz is just the perfect entry point into Blom's whole thesis.
Let's start there then.
Yeah, because to understand why oil prices dropped when geopolitical tension was so high, you have to look at the underlying mechanics of global supply and demand.
Right, the stuff beneath the headlines.
Exactly. Starting with the quiet, highly strategic moves made by China over the past 2 years.
Yeah, because historically, any headline involving Iran and the Strait of Hormuz just sends algorithmic traders into this absolute buying frenzy.
Oh, instantly.
But Blom points out that a massive variable in the global demand equation has been completely neutralized here. So walk me through the mechanics of China's strategic petroleum reserves, because it sounds like they effectively front-loaded their demand while the rest of the world was just distracted.
That is exactly what happened. So a strategic petroleum reserve, or SPR, is basically a country's emergency stockpile of crude oil.
Right, for a rainy day.
Exactly. And they store this stuff in massive underground salt caverns, or these huge industrial tank farms. And over the past couple of years, taking advantage of various market dislocations.
Like buying heavily discounted Russian oil that Western countries sanctioned?
Spot on. China went on this historic buying spree. I mean, they were acting as a massive vacuum for global oil production.
Just sucking up everything on the market.
Yeah, which kept global demand looking artificially high. But here's the thing about a physical storage tank, it only holds so much.
Right, you eventually run out of room.
Exactly. And recently, China's reserves essentially reached their absolute maximum capacity.
Wow. So they didn't just slow down their purchasing. They hit a physical wall.
A literal physical wall.
They literally ran out of room to put the oil, so their importing abruptly fell off a cliff.
Precisely. I mean, when the world's largest oil importer suddenly steps out of the spot market because their pantry is entirely full, it leaves a massive vacuum in global demand.
That makes so much sense.
Right. So when the geopolitical noise around the Strait of Hormuz flared up with this new temporary agreement, the market knew something critical.
Which was what?
They knew that if there actually is a physical supply disruption in the Middle East, China doesn't need to panic buy on the open market and drive the price up for everyone else.
Because they can just open the tap on their own massive reserves.
Exactly. They can ride out a 60-day disruption effortlessly. And that knowledge alone completely deflates the speculative panic that normally drives those massive oil spikes.
Okay, so that explains the demand side.
Yeah.
But Bloom's review notes This is a two-sided structural shift.
It is.
Because even with China sitting on the sidelines, I mean, aren't we still consuming a massive amount of energy globally?
We absolutely are, but the production side of the equation has quietly just outpaced us. Yeah. The ING review highlights this massive structural oversupply that's currently baked into the market. We're talking about the United States, through its vast shale and fracking operations, just pumping at record levels.
Right. They've been ramping up for years.
And not just them, we are talking about OPEC nations and the United Arab Emirates specifically expanding their production capacity, too.
Wow.
So when you aggregate all of this, the world is currently producing significantly more crude oil than it is structurally consuming. And the forward projections, they show that production capacity is only going to increase next year.
Okay, so to put this in everyday terms for you listening, it's like everyone in a major city was bracing for this massive apocalyptic traffic jam.
I love this analogy, yeah.
Right, because the evening news rumored that the main highway might close for repairs. So people are stressing out. They're anticipating a 3-hour commute.
Everyone's dreading Monday morning.
Exactly. But then Monday morning rolls around, and two things happen. First, the biggest employer in the city announced everyone is working from home for the next 2 months.
Which is China's full reserves, pulling all those drivers off the road.
Yes. And second, over the weekend, the city quietly opened 3 brand new lanes on all the alternate routes.
And that's the structural oversupply from the U.S. and OPEC.
Right. So the main highway could completely shut down and traffic would still flow faster than it did a year ago.
That is the exact dynamic at play here. I mean, the market panic is based on these legacy assumptions about how things operate, but the underlying infrastructure of the market has completely evolved.
It's a totally different game now.
It really is. The physical buffer of oversupply and that strategic buffer of full reserves, they basically act as this giant macroeconomic shock absorber.
And if that shock absorber is keeping global energy prices from skyrocketing, I mean, that directly bleeds into the second major theme Bloom tackles, which is inflation.
Oh, absolutely. It's all connected.
Because energy isn't just the gas in your car. It is the fundamental underlying cost of literally everything we consume.
Everything.
Right. If crude oil stabilizes, the cost to manufacture a cardboard box stabilizes.
The cost to run the refrigeration at the supermarket stabilizes.
Exactly. The cost to ship a container of electronics stabilizes.
Yeah. Energy is basically the bedrock of the entire inflation index.
Okay.
And the data the ING review points to is just incredibly validating on this front.
What does the data show?
We are looking at significant unexpected drops in inflation across all the major European economic engines. So in France, inflation recently dropped from 2.8% down to a very manageable 2%.
That's a huge drop.
It is. And Germany saw a similar cooling, dropping from 2.6% to 2.3%. And these aren't just, statistical blips.
They're real trends.
Yeah, they represent a fundamental cooling of the aggressive price pressures we've been seeing over the last 2 years.
But this is where the ING review introduces a concept that I think explains the modern corporate landscape just perfectly. Bloom discusses the end of what was dubbed greedflation.
Ah, yes, greedflation.
And the beginning of a reverse dynamic. Let's wind the clock back to like 2022 and 2023 for a second. Energy prices were going parabolic because of the war in Ukraine. And supply chains were still tangled from COVID.
It was a mess.
Total mess. And companies across the board had this universally accepted, highly publicized excuse to just raise their prices.
And boy, did they ever. Many of them raised prices significantly higher than their actual cost increases justified. That was the whole greedflation phenomenon.
Because they knew they could get away with it.
Exactly, because consumers had built up massive cash buffers during the pandemic lockdowns. They hadn't been traveling or eating out.
So they had the capacity to absorb those higher prices.
Right, and when a business sees that its customers will just accept a 15% price hike without walking away, and the business can just blame global energy markets on the evening news.
They will take that extra profit margin every single time.
Every single time.
But Bloom is arguing that the cover has essentially been blown. Because of that structural oversupply in oil we just discussed, energy prices have flatlined. The excuse is gone.
Right. If you are a corporate executive today, you can no longer point to the news and claim your energy overhead is forcing you to raise prices.
You'd be laughed out of the room.
Let's walk through how this actually plays out in a business-to-business negotiation, because that's where inflation is truly fought. It's not just at the checkout counter.
Oh, B2B is the front lines.
So if I'm a major European food manufacturer, And my primary packaging supplier comes to me today asking for a 9% price increase. I'm not just going to nod and accept it like I did back in 2022.
Not at all. As the food manufacturer, your procurement team is going to pull up the exact same commodity charts that the supplier has.
Right. I have access to the same data.
Exactly. You are going to look at the stabilized price of natural gas, you're going to look at the flatline price of crude oil, and you are going to push back aggressively.
So what do I tell them?
You tell that packaging supplier, look, your energy inputs are down 20% year over year. Your transportation costs have totally normalized. You have zero justification for this price hike. In fact, we should be negotiating a discount.
Exactly. That loss of the universally accepted excuse is what halts the secondary effects of inflation. It severely restricts the pricing power of corporations across the entire supply chain.
Which logically means prices at the consumer level should be stabilizing.
They should, on paper.
But here is the massive paradox that Visser and Blom wrestle with in the review. If the macroeconomic data shows inflation cooling down to 2% and corporate pricing power is heavily restricted, why is the average consumer on the street still incredibly pessimistic?
It's the million-dollar question.
I mean, the review explicitly notes that consumer confidence in the Netherlands is currently hovering at its second lowest point in 30 to 35 years.
Which is wild when you think about it.
The only time it was measurably worse was the absolute panic at the very outbreak of the war in Ukraine. So if the economic fundamentals are actually working, are consumers just structurally traumatized by the last 3 years?
Structurally traumatized is honestly the perfect psychological framing for this. Economists often forget that humans do not experience the economy in percentages.
Right. We don't live in a spreadsheet.
We experience it in absolute nominal values. So when the central bank is popping champagne and celebrating that inflation has fallen to 2%, they are celebrating disinflation.
Meaning the rate of increase has slowed down to a healthy level.
Exactly. But the consumer, they are looking for deflation. They want the price of their weekly groceries to go back to what it cost in 2019.
Which is, I mean, that's never going to happen without a catastrophic economic depression.
Right. It's virtually impossible. If a carton of eggs went from €2 to €4 during the crisis, a 2% inflation rate means it now costs €4.08.
So it's still going up.
Yes. The consumer is still staring at a price tag that is double what they anchor their reality to. And that creates deep, lingering psychological scarring. It just feels like the economy is broken, even if it has technically stabilized.
But the ING review doesn't stop at the pessimism, right? It actually finds a silver lining in the consumer data.
It does.
Bloom argues that while people are deeply grumpy about the current absolute price levels, like they hate paying €4 for those eggs, their terror of the future has basically evaporated.
This is a crucial distinction in consumer behavior. Research shows that the fear of unknown future inflation has plummeted.
So they aren't panicking anymore.
Right. In 2022, a consumer might have thought, my energy bill doubled this year. What if it doubles again next year? I need to hoard all my cash.
They were just bracing for impact.
Totally. But today, they might hate their current energy bill, but they are relatively confident it's going to stay exactly where it is.
The bleeding has stopped.
Exactly. And in macroeconomics, a decrease in uncertainty is the necessary prerequisite for a return to normal spending patterns.
Because if you know what things cost, you can plan.
Precisely. Once a household realizes the ground beneath their feet isn't violently shifting anymore, they grudgingly accept the new baseline, they adjust their budgets, and they begin to engage with the broader economy again.
So it's like the difference between being stranded on a life raft in a hurricane versus being stranded on a desert island.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, neither situation is ideal, right?
Yeah.
But on the island, you can at least start building a shelter because you know where the ground is.
Exactly. You aren't constantly fighting just to stay above water.
And this underlying resilience of the, grumpy but stable consumer perfectly mirrors the broader resilience that Blom sees across the entire European economy.
It really does.
And this is perhaps the strongest pushback in a report against the prevailing narrative that Europe is just this fragile museum of past glories, constantly teetering on the edge of financial ruin.
The fragile Europe narrative is incredibly pervasive. You see it especially in Anglo-American financial media all the time. but the ING review argues it is fundamentally outdated.
How so?
Well, if you look at the institutional framework of Europe today compared to a decade ago, the structural shock absorbers are vastly superior.
Let's contextualize that for a second, because a decade ago was the 2012 Eurozone debt crisis.
Dark times for the euro.
Yeah, that was an era where the entire European project genuinely looked like it might just shatter. You had countries like Greece and Italy facing sovereign default, and the central banks were basically just improvising on the fly.
Precisely. The atmosphere in 2012 was sheer panic. I mean, it was heavily reliant on Mario Draghi's famous promise to do whatever it takes to save the euro.
Right, relying on speeches instead of systems.
Exactly. But Blum points to specific mechanical improvements since then, highlighting Italian banks as a prime example. 10 years ago, the balance sheets of major Italian banks were essentially just toxic waste dumps of what we call non-performing loans, or NPLs.
Okay, break down the mechanics of an NPL for us, just so we understand exactly what was fixed. Why was it toxic?
So a non-performing loan is exactly what it sounds like. A bank lent money to a business or an individual, and the borrower has stopped making payments for an extended period, usually over 90 days.
So it's basically dead money.
Dead money. And in 2012, Italian banks were carrying a staggering percent of these dead loans on their books, which meant they had no capital to actually lend to healthy businesses.
Which freezes the entire economy.
It freezes it. Furthermore, if a shock hit the system, those banks would immediately become insolvent, requiring massive government bailouts.
But Bloom says that's been fixed.
Yes. Over the last decade, under intense pressure from the European Central Bank, those banks were forced to aggressively clean house.
How did they do that?
They sold off those bad loan portfolios, they raised fresh capital, and they instituted vastly stricter lending standards. Today, the Italian banking sector, which was once the terrifying weak link of Europe, is structurally sound and highly capitalized.
That's a massive turnaround. And the review also highlights that governments themselves have evolved their crisis playbooks, right?
Definitely. Look at the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
Instead of the chaotic, fragmented austerity responses we saw in the early 2010s, the European Union managed to issue centralized debt and deploy highly targeted recovery funds.
Oh, right. They actually coordinated.
Yes. They figured out the mechanics of injecting capital directly into critical infrastructure and green transitions across member states to keep the baseline economy moving during a total lockdown.
So they learned how to use fiscal policy as a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer.
Exactly. But according to Bloom, the most fascinating counterintuitive shock absorber in the modern European economy isn't the banking regulation or the targeted funds.
What is it?
It is actually the structural shortage of workers. The ING review refers to this as the buffer economy.
Now, this is completely counterintuitive to hear economists frame a structural labor shortage as a macroeconomic shield.
I know, it sounds backwards.
Right. I mean, if you talk to any small business owner or read any corporate earnings report, businesses are screaming about the lack of staff.
They can't hire anyone.
They can't find engineers. They can't find nurses. They can't find hospitality workers. It is strangling their ability to expand.
So walk me through Bloom's math here. How does this massive headache for business actually stabilize the macroeconomy?
It all comes down to a phenomenon called labor hoarding.
Labor hoarding.
Yeah. So in a traditional economic cycle, before this demographic shortage hit, companies treated labor as a highly liquid variable cost.
Meaning they could hire and fire at will.
Exactly. If the economy dipped into a recession and a company's quarterly profits fell by 10%, the CEO's immediate reflexive response was to fire 10% of the workforce to protect the profit margin.
Which immediately triggers a vicious downward spiral.
Yep.
Because those fired workers stop going to restaurants, they stop buying new cars, which hurts some profits of other companies, who then fire their own workers. That is just the classic cascading recession.
The textbook death spiral, exactly.
Yeah.
But today, the labor market in Europe, and particularly the Netherlands, is historically tight. Finding competent, reliable staff is incredibly difficult and expensive. So what happens when profits dip now?
When that same company sees a 10% dip in profits today, the CEO's calculus has completely changed. They look at their workforce and realize that if they lay off their skilled engineers or their trained logistics managers to save a few bucks this quarter,
They might never get them back.
exactly, they will spend twice as much money and 6 months of lost productivity trying to rehire them when the economy inevitably bounces back.
Okay, it's like finding a highly reliable, fairly priced contractor right now.
Yes. Good luck with that.
Right. If you have a phenomenal plumber on retainer for your property management business, you do not fire him just because you have a slow month in November.
Oh, wait.
Because you know with absolute certainty that when a pipe bursts in January, you'll be on a 6-month waiting list paying triple the hourly rate to get a stranger to fix it.
Exactly.
You just eat the cost of his retainer during the slow month because the retention is so much cheaper than the replacement.
That is the exact mechanism of labor hoarding at scale. Across the entire European economy, companies are choosing to absorb temporary hits to their profit margins in order to retain their workforce.
And because they keep their jobs, they keep spending money.
Yes, millions of people are keeping their jobs during an economic slowdown, so they keep going to restaurants, they keep buying things. This fundamentally severs that self-reinforcing cycle of a recession. The tight labor market acts as this massive structural buffer for consumer spending.
Okay, so the macro picture is weirdly resilient. We have sanitized banks, smarter government spending, and a labor shortage acting as a recession shield.
It's a solid foundation.
But that very same labor shortage creates a brutal, unforgiving bottleneck for the next major topic Blom and Visser tackle. We need to pivot to the sheer terrifying math of the national budget, specifically focusing on the new Dutch minority cabinet and their €20 billion defense bill.
Yeah, this is where the theoretical resilience of the economy collides with harsh geopolitical reality.
Because things are getting tense?
They are. Driven by the war in Ukraine, the rising threat posture of Russia, and very clear signals from the United States that Europe must fund its own protection, the Netherlands has committed to meeting the NATO standard.
Which is spending 2% of its GDP on defense.
Exactly. And the review lays out the math, and it is incredibly stark.
Just massive numbers.
To hit that norm and maintain it, the Dutch government needs to find roughly 19.6 billion euros, effectively 20 billion, when you factor in the necessary surrounding infrastructure just to fund defense.
And Blum makes a critical distinction here that I think changes everything. This is not a one-time incidental cost.
Right. This isn't building a bridge or a single hospital where you pay for it once and you are done.
It's a subscription.
A very expensive subscription. This 20 billion euros is a structural, recurring annual operating cost. It is the cost of paying thousands of soldiers' salaries every single month.
The cost of constantly replenishing artillery ammunition.
The cost of maintaining advanced jet fighters and replacing equipment as it depreciates. You have to find that 20 billion this year and next year and the year after that forever.
And because it is a permanent operating expense, the fundamental laws of government finance dictate that you cannot simply debt finance it indefinitely.
We can't.
You cannot put your baseline recurring expenses on the national credit card year after year without eventually triggering a sovereign debt crisis.
The math just doesn't work.
So if borrowing the 20 billion is off the table, the government really only has 2 levers left to pull, right? Raise 20 billion in new taxes or cut 20 billion from existing budgets.
And this is where the ING review highlights the specific targets the new cabinet is looking at. Because the defense bill is so massive, you can't just trim the edges of small departmental budgets.
You can't just cut the paperclip budget and find 20 billion.
Right, you have to go after the biggest pots of money the government has. In the Netherlands, as in most European welfare states, the absolute largest expenditures are healthcare and social security.
Specifically, the WW and WIA systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which are unemployment and disability benefits.
Exactly.
Now, setting all politics completely aside and looking strictly at the economic theory. Blom outlines targeting unemployment and disability benefits to fund the military seems highly explosive.
It is a political minefield.
So economically speaking, is there a cold, rational logic to targeting the social safety net, or is it literally just the only bank account big enough to raid?
It is actually a deeply intertwined economic calculation, and it brings us right back to the structural labor shortage we just discussed.
Really? How so?
Well, in an economy that is absolutely desperate for workers, any policy that pushes people off government assistance and back into the private sector workforce, a concept economists call activation, is viewed by policymakers as highly rational.
Okay. So the underlying math is this. If you make unemployment benefits less generous, or you tighten the medical requirements for long-term disability, you create intense financial pressure on a specific demographic of people. And the economic theory assumes that a certain percentage of those people facing reduced benefits will be forced to re-enter the labor market.
Exactly. It is a harsh utilitarian efficiency. By squeezing the Social Security budget, the government theoretically solves two massive problems simultaneously.
What's the first one?
First, they drastically reduce their own structural spending, freeing up the billions needed for tanks and ammunition.
Yeah, the second.
Second, they theoretically activate thousands of new workers, injecting desperately needed human capital into the starving private sector, which in turn generates more income tax revenue.
Okay. The math is brutal, but I see the logic. But Bloom's review explicitly notes that slashing the safety net is not the only mathematical option available to the government.
No, it's not.
They cite alternative paths, specifically referencing recent reports from the CPB, right? The Netherlands Bureau for Economic Policy Analysis.
The CPB report is fascinating because it clearly outlines that instead of cutting benefits, the government could choose to raise revenues by heavily taxing accumulated wealth,
Like what kind of wealth?
specifically targeting inheritances and the massive untaxed equity sitting in privately owned family homes.
Ah,
And from a purely macroeconomic perspective, economists broadly agree that taxing static accumulated wealth is far less distortive to economic growth than taxing the income generated by active labor.
so if taxing wealth is economically smarter, why does the cabinet default to cutting Social Security?
Because of pure political gravity.
Right.
As Blom points out, while economists love wealth taxes on paper, voters utterly despise them in reality.
I can imagine.
I mean, a politician suggesting that the government take a massive cut of the family home you plan to leave to your children, that is historically a fast track to losing an election.
Right. So with wealth taxes politically toxic and infinite borrowing economically impossible, the path of least resistance basically defaults to cutting the budgets of those who often have the least political lobbying power.
Exactly, those reliant on social safety nets and public health care.
But even if they successfully navigate those cuts, I mean, simply shuffling 20 billion euros from the healthcare budget to the defense budget doesn't actually solve the long-term viability of the country.
No, it's just moving money around.
Right, because we still have an aging population requiring more care and expensive climate transition and crumbling infrastructure. To afford everything without dismantling the state, the entire economic pie needs to get significantly bigger.
And this is exactly what pivots the ING review into this massive debate on long-term growth, centering on what they call the Wenink blueprint.
Okay, let's get into the Wenink blueprint, because this is where the conversation shifts from managing decline to actually engineering prosperity.
It's the most hopeful part of the report.
So Peter Wenink is the former CEO of ASML. And for context for you listening, ASML is a Dutch company that is arguably the single most important technology manufacturer on the planet right now.
Hands down.
They build the hyper-complex, multi-hundred-million-dollar EUV lithography machines that print the world's most advanced microchips. So Wenink understands industrial scale and technological dominance better than almost anyone alive.
He really does. And he put forward this highly detailed blueprint aimed at fundamentally rescuing Europe's baseline economic growth.
Because right now, Bloom notes that the long-term expected baseline growth for the region is, what, a highly sluggish 0.5%?
Yeah, it's basically flatlining. But Wenink's blueprint argues that through massive targeted structural investments, we could drag that baseline up to 1.5% or even 2%.
And while a 1.5% difference sounds like a rounding error to a layman,
Mm-hmm.
over a decade, the compounding effect of 2% annual growth generates hundreds of billions of euros in natural, unforced tax revenue.
It changes everything. It is literally the difference between easily funding world-class public services and constantly fighting over budget cuts.
But achieving that compounding growth requires an aggressive, visionary industrial policy.
Which is where we hit a snag.
Right. The ING review points out a massive, glaring disconnect between what Wenink says is mandatory for survival and what the current government is actually doing.
Yeah, because the current cabinet's industrial policy is highly focused on immediate short-term fixes. They are subsidizing offshore wind farms in the North Sea primarily to lower the immediate energy overhead for legacy heavy industry and chemical plants.
Which is fine for keeping current factories open, but it doesn't build the future.
Exactly.
Wenink's blueprint says the investments must be poured into digitalization, advanced sovereign AI models, massive cloud computing infrastructure, and biotechnology.
Right. It is the realization that Europe is falling terrifyingly behind in the industries that will define the next 50 years. The review highlights the severe geopolitical vulnerability this creates.
It's not just about money, it's about power.
Absolutely. Right now, Europe relies almost entirely on the United States hyperscalers like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure for its cloud infrastructure. And it relies on Asian foundries for its physical hardware.
Which is a huge risk.
If you do not control the data centers, the AI models, and the chip manufacturing within your own borders, you simply do not have true economic sovereignty.
You're at their mercy.
Exactly. If political alliances shift or supply chains fracture, Europe could be technologically held hostage.
So when it lays out this clear, urgent blueprint to build this sovereign tech ecosystem, and a lot of it doesn't even require pure government handouts, right?
Right.
It requires regulatory alignment and public-private coordination.
Yep.
Yet Blum notes that at the national level in The Hague, almost nothing of substance is being done to execute this blueprint. Why the complete paralysis when the stakes are literally this high?
The review cites this brilliant, highly pragmatic theory from Niek Jan van Kesteren. He's a prominent Dutch political and employers organization figure. He coined what we can call the one reform rule.
The one reform rule.
Yeah. He observed that the sheer complexity of modern governance means a national cabinet realistically only has the human bandwidth and the political capital to handle one major systemic reform at a time.
And right now, their entire bandwidth is consumed by two massive crises.
Exactly. They are completely bogged down trying to execute the multi-billion-euro defense overhaul we just discussed, while simultaneously drowning in the nitrogen or Stickstoff crisis.
Oh man, the nitrogen crisis.
Yep.
Let's explain the mechanics of that quickly, because it sounds absurd to an outsider that an element in the air is paralyzing a modern economy.
It does sound crazy.
Right. Due to incredibly strict environmental regulations regarding nitrogen emissions near protected nature reserves, the permitting process in the Netherlands has essentially frozen.
Frozen solid.
A construction company literally cannot get a legal permit to run a diesel excavator, pour concrete for a new highway, or build a new housing development because the emissions calculate too high. It has legally frozen critical infrastructure development across the entire country.
So when the cabinet is spending 90% of its energy trying to legally figure out how to pour concrete for a housing block without violating EU environmental law.
And the other 10% trying to buy tanks?
Exactly. They literally have zero intellectual bandwidth left to orchestrate a continent-wide artificial intelligence and quantum computing revolution.
But this reveals a terrifying systemic bottleneck. If a national government can functionally only handle one crisis at a time, but global markets are aggressively advancing in AI, biotech, and cloud computing simultaneously,
Right.
does that fundamentally mean the speed of modern technological change has simply outpaced the bandwidth of traditional democratic politics? Are we relying on an 18th century legislative system to regulate a 21st century technological arms race?
That is the exact existential question Bloom's review forces us to confront. If you rely solely on a national government, which is constantly distracted by domestic scandals, coalition infighting, and four-year election cycles, to design and execute a 30-year deep tech strategy,
You've already lost.
you've already lost the race. The national apparatus is simply too slow and too constrained.
So if The Hague is tapped out and national governments are too slow, what is the mechanism to actually execute the Wenning blueprint? Who builds the future?
The inescapable conclusion of the ING review is that the only viable solution is massive, frictionless, cross-border European cooperation. You have to elevate the strategy above national gridlock.
Which sounds great, but what does it actually look like?
Well, this isn't just a vague call for more Europe. Blom lays out a highly specific structural agenda. It starts with the Capital Markets Union and specifically harmonizing bankruptcy laws across the continent.
Okay, let's dive into the mechanics of that, because harmonizing bankruptcy laws sounds like the most boring bureaucratic undertaking
It
imaginable.
really does.
But it is actually the secret engine of Silicon Valley's success. Why is this the key to unlocking European tech growth?
It comes down to how risk capital flows. If you are building a cutting-edge biotech startup, you need massive amounts of money upfront with a very high chance of failure.
It's extremely risky.
Traditional European banks, which are highly risk-averse, will not give you a loan for that. You need venture capital or risk-tolerant institutional money.
Yeah.
Currently, Europe has massive pools of capital sitting in places like French or Dutch pension funds. But if a pension fund manager in Paris wants to invest 50 million euros into a brilliant quantum computing startup in Amsterdam, they have to navigate two entirely different legal systems.
I see.
If the startup fails, the French investor doesn't fully understand how Dutch bankruptcy courts will prioritize their claims. The risk is legally opaque.
So because the failure mechanics are too complicated across borders, the capital just stays home.
Or worse, it gets invested into American tech companies where the rules are unified.
Wow.
Exactly. So harmonizing bankruptcy laws creates a unified, transparent legal framework across the entire continent. Suddenly, that pension fund in Paris can inject risk capital into Amsterdam, Berlin, or Rome, just as easily as a New York fund invests in Silicon Valley.
Which unlocks billions in private risk capital to fund the winning blueprint without needing government tax dollars.
Exactly. Add to that the integration of energy grids, ensuring that massive offshore wind farms in the North Sea can seamlessly and legally transmit power directly to energy-hungry AI data centers in Germany, and you create a unified economic engine that can actually compete globally.
But we all know that waiting for 27 European member states to agree on complex legal harmonization could take a decade. We don't have.
True.
Is there a faster, localized model that actually works right now? Because the ING review ends by highlighting a massive, tangible success story that completely bypassed the national gridlock.
Yes, and this is the ultimate proof of concept for the glass-half-full optimism in the report. It is known as Project Beethoven, and it's centered in the Eindhoven region of the Netherlands.
Oh, this brings us back to ASML.
It does.
Ah.
They are based in Eindhoven, and they were experiencing hyperscale growth, but they hit a massive local bottleneck. They essentially signaled to the government, "We are growing so fast that the region is buckling. There are no houses for our new engineers to live in, the local highways are gridlocked, and the regional technical university cannot graduate talent fast enough."
They outgrew their own hometown.
Exactly. And they basically said, if we cannot physically expand our footprint here, we have no choice but to take our expansion and our billions in revenue to France or Germany or the US.
Which would have been a catastrophic generational loss of technological sovereignty and economic growth for the Netherlands.
Massive blow. But instead of watching the national government form a committee that would take 5 years to study the problem, a highly localized coalition formed.
They just handled it.
Yeah, they didn't just write a massive corporate welfare check directly to ASML to bribe them to stay. Instead, they orchestrated a massive pooling of public and private capital.
So local municipalities, the regional provincial government, the national government, and private industry, including ASML itself, all threw billions of euros into a highly targeted, synergistic fund.
And they deployed that capital directly into the ecosystem. They fast-tracked the construction of thousands of new homes specifically designed for the influx of tech workers.
They fixed the housing problem.
Right. They upgraded the regional rail and highway infrastructure to handle the commute. Most importantly, they poured massive funding into the Eindhoven University of Technology to massively scale up their engineering and physics departments to guarantee a pipeline of talent.
It is the ultimate neighborhood synergy. It's like
Yep.
realizing you have a brilliant neighbor trying to build a world-class supercomputer in his garage.
Right.
But his power keeps tripping, and he has no room for his tools. Instead of letting him move away, the entire neighborhood agrees to knock down the fences. Everyone chips in to upgrade the neighborhood power grid, build a communal workshop, and hire a tutor for all the kids on the street to learn coding.
I love that.
Right? Suddenly, you haven't just helped one guy. You've turned your entire street into the most valuable tech hub in the city.
That is precisely why Project Beethoven is the gold standard moving forward. It bypassed the one reform political gridlock by aligning the immediate ruthless self-interest of a private tech giant with the long-term desperate infrastructure needs of the public.
A perfect alignment.
It created structural baseline growth without requiring endless, inefficient government subsidies. It proves that when the bureaucratic friction is removed, the capital and the ingenuity to build the future already exist within Europe.
And that triumph brings us to the overarching philosophical theme as we wrap up this deep dive. The ING review concludes by pulling the camera all the way back.
Yeah, taking the macro view.
Despite the intense anxieties we've unpacked today, the geopolitical fragility, the structural defense deficits, the technological arms race, Marieke Blom reminds us that the Netherlands and Europe broadly is operating from a baseline of historically unprecedented wealth.
It's true.
We have exceptionally low unemployment, world-class healthcare standards, and a baseline quality of life that is the envy of the globe.
It is so easy to lose sight of that baseline when you are just buried in the day-to-day friction of inflation reports and budget cuts.
We forget how good we have it.
We really do. We are attempting to fix the roof of a mansion, not a burning shack. We are starting from a position of immense accumulated strength.
But the review offers a profound, almost psychological observation about that exact strength. Blom notes, the higher your wealth, the more you have to lose.
Wow.
Right. And it implies that this inherent fear of loss is actually what drives the pervasive pessimism, completely blinding us to our strong economic fundamentals.
It is a deeply ingrained human bias, loss aversion.
Explain that.
When a society has achieved a historically high standard of living, every single variable, whether it's a new geopolitical conflict, a shift in interest rates, or a new technology like AI, is immediately perceived primarily as a threat to take that wealth away, rather than an opportunity to expand it.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to ponder as you navigate your own career, your business, or your investments. We have spent this entire deep dive examining how governments, central banks, and legacy corporations are scrambling to build walls to protect our current standard of living.
Right.
But consider this. If our most paralyzing economic anxieties stem purely from the terror of losing the comfort we already possess, is our absolute obsession with protecting our current wealth actually the single biggest roadblock preventing us from inventing the future?
That is the ultimate test for Europe, and really for any mature economy. If capital and political will are entirely consumed by the defensive posture of risk aversion, if we are too terrified of failure to harmonize our markets and fund radical innovation, we will never build the next ASMO.
We'll just stagnate.
And we will slowly regulate ourselves right into irrelevance.
Are we playing to win, or have we spent the last 20 years simply playing not to lose? Because the economies that figure out how to break that psychological barrier, the ones that embrace the risk required to build the winning blueprint despite the uncertainties, are the ones that will completely dictate the reality of the next century.
Absolutely.
A huge thank you for joining us today on this deep dive. You are now thoroughly well-informed on the complex, unseen gears turning behind the daily headlines. From the physical realities of global oil reserves and the psychological scarring of grocery inflation, all the way to the brutal mechanics of national defense budgets and the public-private blueprints that are quietly building our tech future.
It's been a journey.
We hope this exploration has given you a powerful new lens through which to view the global economy. Until next time, keep questioning the narrative and keep exploring.